chapter 4. James chapter 4. I love the book of James, I'll be honest with you. I could honestly, I believe, preach week in and week out just from the book of James. Thank you, sir. If you're keeping notes today, whatever the title of the sermon is, where does it go? Where does it go? So, this year has been kind of it's been an up and down roller coaster ride in some ways for us in a lot of different capacities. Knowing, the senior year thing for Bryson, coming into that, last year of high school, last year of high school basketball. Christy's job's been topsy-turvy. Christy's health has been topsy-turvy, and that's something that we've never had to deal with. And my personal journey through all of this has been trying to lean on faith and trying not to be stressed out all at the same time. And that's from every aspect of it. But sometimes life reminds me of like a disappearing trick that a magician performs on stage. It just, I can remember when I was a kid, and I can't remember the dude's last name. It's David something. It was just a big, great magician, would come on TV, and he would do these huge, amazing feats that would make like national monuments disappear and all this stuff, and it was, to a kid, it was mind-blowing. I look at it now and realize he was a scam artist, but nonetheless, he made it look that way, either way. But we reach a point in life when we look at our lives and, like the magician's disappearing trick, we try to figure out where it went. You just look and you're like, man, how did I get here? How am I about to turn 51? Right? I don't feel 51 most of the time. My body feels 51, but I don't feel 51. I'm still like, I got to catch myself because I'm still that goofball, class clown type thing that I was when I was younger if I'm not careful. And if I get that way too much, then Christy's like that teacher that don't put up with the goofball, class clown. She lays the hammer on me there, So, but no, seriously, I look at it, I'm like, man. Well, this past Friday was the culmination of us raising our kids. You think about it. As far as the child rearing part of it, it was the culmination of that. We've already been through a graduation. Caitlin is out of school and she has a family of her own. And now Bryson's embarking on adulthood with the end of high school and the start of college. I know that there's everybody thinks that the number 18 is what we base our adulthood off of, but it's not. 18 is just that birthday where you're legal now to vote and do a few other things, and you're treated as an adult in the legal system. But now he's about to embark on life and what it holds for him. And when I was sitting and staring at a blank screen this morning, thinking of like how to word all of this, like there was a wave of emotions that just absolutely rushed over me. And I was like, man, it was just hard to deal with. And absolutely unscripted. Like Christy came out, I was out on our screen room, and she came out there and said that she had taken some bread to throw out in the yard, and she saw Bryson's graduation gown still hanging in his car or whatever, and she said, I got a little emotional. And I was like, believe me, I know what you're saying, because I had been sitting out there with all that same stuff. And I started, though, in those moments, I started thinking about all the many people that have come and gone in my life in different capacities. I've got some old friends that have moved on with their lives, and they've moved away from here, and I rarely see or hear from them anymore. And that's just the direction that their life took them. And some people that I have chosen to distance myself from, or vice versa. And yet some have left this world, and all I have left of them are memories. I mean, I look at all that, right? And when I reflect on all this and where I am in my life, I have to admit it's really not how I envisioned when I was a child. And so that's the thing that I go back to is like, man, when I was a kid, like I can remember like looking ahead and thinking about, well, this is going to be this way or this will be that way. You know, and you have, I think most all of us have those, you know, those little imaginary friends probably in your life. Maybe not. I might be the only one. I might be telling on myself that I used to talk to my imaginary friend. But the things that I looked at in life, I was like, man, it's not, when I look at it now, I'm like, no, I didn't necessarily see a lot of it this way. When I was a child, I never thought about a life that didn't include my mom. So I can remember being a kid, like I was looking, even when I was an old man in my mind, that my mom was still there. Well, she ain't. You know, God called her home. I never thought about not physically being able to do things, anything that I wanted to do. There's things now that I can't physically do that I used to be able to do. Even though I wanted one, I never really thought that I'd have an amazing wife that loves me and all my goofy quirks and has been through like everything that we've been through together. Like that, I didn't see that. I never thought that I would have friends my age or younger that have already passed away. Like that's not one of those thoughts that you have at that time. I never thought about being close enough to retirement to be able to honestly consider it. You know, I was thinking about that the other day. For all intents and purposes, if I wanted to take a little bit of reduced retirement, I could retire now. But I don't. I'm going to work out these next 4. And I never could have imagined how much I wouldn't be ready to become an empty nester. Like that part's hard. But you don't think about that. So you think about when you're younger, like growing up and having a family and things like that. But you just think about raising a family and like having kids or whatever. Like in your imagination when you're a kid and you're thinking about being a mom or a dad when down the road, you don't ever think about your kids growing up. You just think about them being your kids, which they always will be, but unfortunately they grow up. So we think we have everything figured out, and we think that we know what we're going to do tomorrow, and that's just simply not the case. It's just not the case. As good as it sounds and as much of an awesome planner as we are, and I can tell you, like, Christy, like, she's got things planned. She knows things. Like, she knows well ahead of time, and if things aren't planned, then she gets a little stressed out. And I plan things usually 5 minutes before they happen. And then they usually don't work out. But anyway, James chapter 4 is where we are. James 4, I'm going to just read 2 verses, starting with verse 13. I'm sure these verses are not, they're probably not foreign to you. These have been repeated many times, recited. James 4, starting with verse 13. You find your place, say God is good? God is good. All the time. God is good. Yeah. All right, James 4, verse 13, reading from the NLT. Look here, you who say today or tomorrow, we're going to a certain town and we'll stay there a year. We will do business there and make a profit. How do you know what your life will be like tomorrow? Pay attention to this last line. Your life is like the morning fog. It's here a little while, then it's gone. So, that's where I was at this morning. contemplating on that, thinking on that, looking at everything that's transpired, looking at how fast things go by, even though, you know, we look at something and say, oh, well, it's like you get a new roof. You get a new roof, you're like, man, I'm good for 20 years. Well, I'm looking at our roof right now. We're coming up on that. We ain't too far off from that. You know, and I get reminded when I look and see the shingle is flown off, and I got to holler at my neighbor who works on roofs and ask him to come and fix that for me. But here's the thing is James was pretty well able to explain everything that I've just talked about in 2 verses. I mean, he pretty well summed it up right there in those 2 verses. Like, we plan for things and we say what we're going to do and we plan on how it's going to look and what we anticipate it being. But we don't know what tomorrow holds. Because we need to be reminded that life, depending on the translation you read, I think the King James and the New King James say that life is like a vapor. You know, or it's like a morning fog, whatever it is. If y'all remember, I took some pictures a couple years ago when I preached the Savor the Flavor message. I took some pictures of like morning fog and the steam rising off of the creeks and the rivers when I was fishing and stuff like that. And like they were literally there when I would take the pictures. I put my phone up and go back to fishing and turn around, they'd be gone. That's what he's talking about. If you've ever gone camping near a water source or whatever, you'll see that a lot of times. You wake up in the morning, but then a few minutes later the sun rises and it's gone. We get ideas and we decide that we're going to pursue them, and we start making plans on how we'll go about this pursuit like we've already seen tomorrow. That's the way we approach things. It's like we talk about what we're going to do like we've already seen tomorrow. We know what tomorrow's going to hold when indeed we don't. The fact is we only have the hope of how that will turn out and how that process will go. We hope for it that way, right? Ultimately, God is the only one that has seen our tomorrow. We haven't seen it. Nobody else around has either. And He is the only one that has any say over how tomorrow will go. As a matter of fact, He's the only one that has any say on whether we will be here tomorrow or not. In verse 15, James goes on to explain that we should say, if the Lord wants us to, we will live and do this or that. In other words, if it's the Lord's will. And that's why when we pray over things, and we've encouraged him his whole life to pray for the Lord's will, and then it come time to make college decisions, and it was narrowed down to 2 schools. He finally narrowed it down to 2 out of 4 or 5 that he had originally. And like we were like, well, son, are you leaning any way or anything like that? And he said, no. And we'd be like, all right. So then we would pray as a family for God's will. He would pray for God's will. And then the next thing you know, God showed us his will. Now, I'm just going to be completely honest with you. It ain't the will that I was praying for. All right. Because James Madison's 4 hours away and ETSU's 40 minutes away. I was praying for that one, you know. But we wanted God to take him where God can use him and where God needed him. And we feel like that's what God has done. This passage always, though, takes me back to that rope illustration that I borrowed from Francis Chan. If you were here when I did it, you remember that in the other building, there was a door over here, and I ran a long rope out that door, and I held that piece up here that I had taped about that far down with blue masking tape. And like Chan refers to the effort when he uses that, and I did that time, that we put into our short time here on earth instead of our eternity. Like we invest so much into what we're going to do on this little bit of time instead of what we'll do with that eternity, that time that we can't see. But when I think of it in the context of this passage, I think about the fact that we forget just how fast this life goes. Because when you look at how long that rope was, and it disappeared under that door, but I think it was a 100-foot rope that I bought for that or whatever. I really don't know why I bought 100 feet. But anyway, but I taped that little bit right here. So when you put that in context, that's a very small amount of time. And that's kind of what he was saying, is why we should prepare ourselves more for eternity than for this short time here on earth. But you think about it in this context, when you wake up tomorrow, there may be an event that has happened in your life to make you look and say, man, where has time gone? That's what we've been going through. That's what anybody else with a graduate right now has been going through. That's what anybody who's lost a loved one recently has gone through. That's what happens when we walk by a mirror and we look and we're like, man, where did those wrinkles come from? Where did that little bit of gray come? Where'd my hair go? You know what I'm saying? I mean, I'm just saying, it's a reminder that life is like a morning fog. It's only here for a little bit, man. That's why it's called a morning fog, right? Or a vapor. It don't seem possible to me that it's been 18 years since we were waking up at 2 in the morning and feeding him and changing his diaper. I mean, that's just crazy. And like, we got a grandbaby now, and I refuse to change her diaper. I'm not doing it. But nonetheless, you know, but now I look at that. Like, I can remember, I used to carry a picture of my clipboard at work of him in the hospital and me holding him. And I was holding him like this, literally like that, looking at him. And she took that picture. And like, I look back on that now, I can't pick him up like that anymore. I don't know if I can pick his little hind end up at all anymore, you know, but nonetheless, where did that go? See, we take it for granted. That's what this is all about. Like, I'm not trying to make you sad. I'm trying to challenge you not to take this life for granted in a lot of different aspects. If I live till September and y'all don't vote me out, I will have been the pastor here 9 years. Half of his life, I've been the pastor here. But 9 years, that's something else that I can assure you when I was a child, I did not see. If she don't vote me out of our home, then Christy and I will have our 25th anniversary in July. That's the island I don't want to get voted off of, guys. I'm just going to be honest with you. If y'all vote me out, I'll make it, all right? If she votes me out, y'all won't make it either. We'll all be crazy. I mean, it honestly, though, when I look at that, it seems like we just said our vows. It really does. It don't seem like 25 years together. It probably seems like 125 to her, but it don't seem like it to me. When I look back and I take all this into account, I realize how many of the years that I lived and did things that were totally outside of God's will. That part bothers me too. So I look at that and I'm like, you know, because now I pray God's will over my life and everything I do. You know, I was just named the head coach at John Battle in basketball. I prayed for God's will on that, not for Mike's will, because if Mike's will, I'd have been the head coach somewhere a long time ago. But for whatever reason, God saw fit to give me that. Now, is that going to be a strain? Sure. Do I take on too many things? Absolutely. But I'm at peace with that because I prayed God's will. Like, I didn't do anything to make that happen. I just prayed. When I look back, though, and I take all this in account, I realize how many of the years that just didn't click the way they were supposed to, the way I was supposed to reflect Him. I was saved in my living room when I was 14. I've shared that with y'all. But I sure spent a lot of time not living like it. And I'd love to be able to go back and get that time back, but I can't. And I look at that gap of time between when I received Christ in my living room with perfect strangers that led me to Christ. Like, everybody's got these great salvation stories. Somebody knocked on my door and wanted to talk to me. My mom wasn't home, and I was 14 years old, and let somebody up in the living room in Rice Terrace. I was just proud of them for not being scared to be in Rice Terrace, but they, you know. But nonetheless, they led me to Christ in there. I remember my mom coming home, and I remember telling her about it. I was sitting outside on the front steps with a hammer and cassette tape smashing them because I listened to stuff that didn't reflect Christian, so I was going to go ahead and make that change. About 2 weeks later, I was trying to put them back together. But nonetheless, for 2 weeks, I was on fire, you know. But then I started slipping or whatever. And a lot of that comes from foundation, guys. You know, my mom was a good woman, but she wasn't a church-going woman until later in her life. But I'd love to get back to it. I know if we're all being honest, we probably would all change a few things if we could go back and do it over. If we got a do-over, we'd probably change some things. But the really cool thing about that is the reason that we don't have to go back and change anything is God's grace. Because he loves us right where we are, right how we are. And then he'll take care of the fixing when we start praying and trusting his will over our lives. You think about it. Without God's grace, we would be getting everything that we deserve. And you think about what the law says, what the Old Testament, you go in, you read the Mosaic Law, you read Leviticus. If you don't read anything else, I encourage you in your life to read Leviticus. It's hard, it's painful. And you're thinking, why did they put this in the Bible? This is why they put it in there. This is why God wanted this in the Bible, is to make sure that we understand that this is, without his grace, all of those things are things that we would be subjected to. That's why. But because he knows that we're going to make a big mess in our life, he knows that we're going to mess some stuff up, right? That we can never truly live up to the standard that was set forth in his law. What did he do? He sent Jesus. He sent Jesus here to die for us, to hang on that cross, so that we could be atoned for all the messes that we make, for all the times that we did things outside of his will, for all the times that we made our own plans and we went forward headlong into whatever without asking him his will. And if you will really be honest with yourself, you can look at a lot of that and say, yeah, that didn't work out because I put myself in it. I went into it the way I wanted to do it. Here's the thing now. I absolutely don't want to do anything outside of his will now. Now keep in mind that I said that I don't want to. I didn't say that I don't. I just said that I don't want to. In Romans, Paul, I think it was Romans 7, Paul said in there that he says, I want to do good, but I don't. And he says, I don't want to do what is wrong, but I do it anyway. That's Paul talking. Because he understood that the nature within him will cause him to do things outside of God's will every now and then. But God's grace shows up. I mean, that's me to a T. When I read that, I'm like, yeah, I understand. And somehow he just keeps loving us through all of that. So anyway, the point I'm trying to make is this. Make the most of the time that you have. Make the most of it. Don't spend half your life living outside of God's will. Instead, I want you to truly, truly fall in love with Jesus and his ways. That's what I want to encourage you to do. I'll never forget a little Post-it note that hung in our daughter's room. She had a little quart thing beside her mirror that hung right there, and it said, I am so in love with God. I'll never forget that. That was in high school she wrote that, and it stayed there for, I don't know, 2 or 3 years, you know. And I had never one time considered my relationship with God or my salvation or anything like that to have anything to do with being in love with him until I read that. Now I look at it that way, and now I want to encourage you and challenge you to be in love with Jesus Christ and his ways and seek his will in everything you do. When we do that, I think it cuts out a lot of our regret. It gives us an opportunity to go forward and do things knowing that we prayed his will, and when we do it, we can look back on it and we can say, you know what? I did this because I prayed his will and I felt this is where he guided me to, and I did it to honor him. Man, you don't have regrets when you look back on that. Don't be like me and have to look back and have so many of those regrets, right? For doing so many things in my will and then having to clean up the messes that I created. Because I can tell you now that if you will just pray and do the things in his will, if there is a mess, it's a lot easier to clean up than having to go and face the disaster that you've caused because you did it in your will. So pray God's will over every decision in life, from what college to attend to what man or woman to marry. Just make sure that if you're a woman, you're praying for a man to marry. And if you're a man, you're praying for a woman to marry. We ain't doing that up in this church. But anyway, make sure that we're seeking his will over everything that we do, everything at all. Value that time that you have with the ones that you love, because you never know when their time on this earth is up. I turned on yesterday, I was going to watch a few minutes of the golf tournament. It was on. There was a PGA player, 30 years old, that passed away yesterday. He was playing golf the day before. He got to the 16th hole. We told the guys that he was withdrawing. He didn't feel well. Now, I never have heard the conclusion of all that. I don't know if they've given a cause of death or anything like that. But 30 years old, he left this world. Treasure your relationships. And above all of that, most importantly, treasure your relationship with Jesus Christ. Psalm 37:3 says, trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and befriend faithfulness. Trust in the Lord and do good. So to sum up placing value on our short time on this earth, I'll share with you what my good friend Benson Redmond shares with his class every single day when he sends them out of the classroom. He says, go and do good. So I want to encourage you the same. Go and do good. And if you will go and do the things that you do the best you can in what you know is God's will, what God is impressing upon you, then you'll be able to value those memories when you look and you realize that life is just a vapor. And somehow or another, you've gotten way out here before you knew it. Bow your head and close your eyes.